Welcome to Conversations, where style meets substance. I'm your host, Kimberly Miller. In my study time this week, I was reading the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, where one servant was given 5 talents, another was given 2, and another was given 1, each according to his ability. What stood out to me was that the servant who received 1 talent was not given less because he was incapable. He was entrusted according to what the master knew he could handle. And at that very moment, I realized that at times I was the servant with the 1, not because I lacked gifts, insight, or capacity, but because I treated what I had as something to protect instead of something to use. The servant with 1 talent did not lose it, or nor did he waste it. He buried it out of fear, believing that hiding it was the safest option. But scripture shows us that fear led him to disobedience, not safety. Open and transparent moment. For a long time, I hid parts of who I am, not because I didn't know who I was, but because I didn't want to be seen as too much. I learned to soften my voice, edit my thoughts, and dim my light so I could make the people around me feel more comfortable. I told myself I was being considerate. I told myself I was being professional. But the truth is, I was shrinking and I was actually operating in disobedience. There comes a time in everyone's life where faith forces you to tell yourself the truth. As I was reading about the talents parable, the servant who buried what was entrusted to him, not because he lacked ability, but because he was afraid. And that at that moment, it hit a little different. I realized I wasn't being humbled by hiding. I was being afraid of being fully seen. And truth be told, I was operating in disobedience. If you've ever felt like you had to make yourself smaller to be accepted, if you ever held back because you didn't want to be judged, misunderstood, or labeled as too much, this conversation is for you. Not hiding does not happen all at once. It starts with awareness. You begin to notice when you're editing yourself mid-sentence, when you have the thought but decide not to say it, when you shrink your excitement, when your faith, your intelligence, or your ambition so that the room can stay comfortable. The awareness is usually the first sign that something valuable is being buried. Just because people shift when you show up fully does not mean that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it simply means you are no longer performing a version of yourself that they are used to. Growth often changes the atmosphere. I also had to stop asking myself, am I doing too much? And start asking, am I being true to who I am? Too much is often code for unfamiliar or uncontained. When you are walking in truth, it will not always fit neatly into the spaces that benefited from you being smaller. Another realization was accepting that not everyone deserves the edited version of me, and not everyone will survive the unedited version of me either. And that is okay. Obedience matters more than approval. Peace comes from being in position, not from being accepted. Faith played a major role in this for me. When you truly believe your gifts are intentional, you will stop apologizing for them. You understand that you were never meant to bury your voice, your leadership, or your presence just to keep the peace. The servant did not hide because he lacked ability. He hid because he was afraid of the response. That forced me to realize what I was burying. Not gifts I did not have, but parts of me I kept editing. My confidence, my faith, my voice, my leadership. What we hide usually shows up in the moment we think, let me not say that. Or this might be too much. This is often the very talent entrusted to us. The parable also taught me that talents grow through use. What was invested multiplied. What was buried stayed the same. Honestly, when I started using my voice imperfectly, publicly, and sometimes uncomfortably, I learned that confidence doesn't come before action. Confidence comes from action. Another truth is that fear sounds responsible. The servant thought he was being cautious. I thought I was being professional. But fear can disguise itself as wisdom when it is actually avoidance. Faith requires movement, even when the outcome is not guaranteed. I also had to accept that accountability comes with visibility. Once you stop hiding, you can now be seen. And once you're seen, you can be elevated. That was the risk that the other servants took, and it was the same risk growth requires. Hiding may protect your feelings, but it also limits your fruit. The parable ends with a reminder that what is entrusted is not optional. Gifts are not suggestions, they are assignments. When you understand that, you stop asking for permission to be who you are. You stop shrinking to manage people's comfort. You show up knowing that obedience matters more than approval. So, no, this is not about doing more. This is about burying less. If this conversation stirred something in you, do not ignore it. Pay attention to what came to mind when you heard the word hiding. Pay attention to the moments you thought about what you had been burying to stay comfortable, to stay accepted, to stay safe. This week, I challenge you to use one thing you've been holding back. Say that thing you normally edit. Show up where you usually shrink. Move on the idea you have been postponing. Not perfectly, just honestly. And if this resonated, share this episode with someone who needs permission to stop hiding the gift God entrusted them with. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Conversations this week. There will be no fashion segment today. Instead, I want to highlight the business behind the visuals, the videography, and the photography, and the entire production that help moments like this and bring them to life. All of that work is done by none other than my husband, Mr. Miller, through Metro Mercial Media Productions. From photography, videography to full-scale media production, his work focuses on capturing stories with clarity, quality, and intention. If you are a business owner, creative, or brand looking to elevate your visual presence, I encourage you to connect with Metro Mercial Media Productions and explore their services. Quality production matters, and the right team makes the difference. Thank you again for joining me in another episode of Conversations. Until next time, keep trusting, keep believing, and keep the conversations going.